Hello everyone. I could see like people joining here, and first of all, thank you everyone who have joined till now for registering to today's speaker series. So every week, like we are picking up one domain, and we are bringing in the thought leaders and the experts in the particular field, and we are sharing knowledge with the community, and through which like we are getting benefited. And let me use this opportunity to give you all a quick intro about DCCAP, the organization behind this speaker series. So, DCCAP is a digital commerce agency and helping businesses and brands abroad to create e-commerce storefronts. And we all know this is a hard time like we are going through, and during this challenging times, being in the lockdown, and it is very much important for every one of us to hone our skills to learn new things and to facilitate learning for all our employees as well as for the general community. So DCCAP has started hosting the speaker series, a virtual event, which happens every Friday. So through speaker series, we bring in distinguished thought leaders, technology masters, and change makers around the globe to address on varied topics which matters to the community most. So having that said, today I'm very glad and proud to welcome Mathrayan Kesavan, and thank you so much Mathrayan for accepting our invitation for enriching the knowledge of our community. And it's my responsibility to give a quick intro about Mathrayan. So he's a Google AI Explore ML facilitator, and he's a co-founder and CEO of Polydimensional, and also he's a co-organizer of TensorFlow user group in Coimbatore. And he has imparted machine learning knowledge to thousands of people across the nation, and he helps and mentors students to begin their journey in the field of machine learning. So that's really awesome to hear. And he also writes technical blog, and he is a writer towards data science. And today he is here with us to enlighten us on intriguing topic like how to build responsible AI. I hope like you guys will have a enriching session today. And if you have any question, feel free to raise your question in the Q&A section that you can see in the bottom of your Zoom window. And over to you, Mathrayan. And thank you again for accepting our invitation.
Thanks a lot, Shrija, for the warm welcome. Thanks everyone for joining, and I hope I'm quite loud and clear. So please mention whether just share the chat that whether I'm clear. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we can, Mathrayan.
Okay. Okay. So the thing is, we'll start with the session. So if you have any doubt at any point of time, please put that in the Q&A section. I will surely answer it in the end. Okay. So let's get started with the session. Okay. So our topic for today is building responsible AI. So we know the power of AI and what AI can do and transform the world. Okay. So we are in the past decade, we have seen a lot of groundbreaking technologies and tools that were built using AI that is actually changing the way we do live our day-to-day life. Okay. So it is important that we build those AI responsibly. So in this session, what we're going to see is we expect you to have some understanding of what AI is. Okay. But we'll be covering in a high-level view on all the new technologies that builds responsible AI. So even if you don't have very strong understanding in AI, it's fine. You can continue with the session. Okay. So to start with, as Srija gave me a warm welcome, so I'm just going forward. So AI is almost transforming every industry out there, from healthcare to e-commerce to traveling. It is affecting and affecting in a good way in almost every industry that is out there. Okay, you need not be a computer science student to actually learn AI. So now many people from different domains are learning AI and combining the domain knowledge in that particular field and creating value. Like many doctors are trying to learn AI, and even mechanical engineers are trying to combine AI with their domain knowledge and create some value out of it. So AI is no more restricted to computer science engineering or a specific domain of people. With the rapid increase in the tools and technologies that we have right now, anyone who is interested can get into this field, and it is kind of decentralized right now. Okay, so getting into AI has become very easy compared to what it was years back. Okay, but yes, as we can see, AI is evolved and many products are being built with AI. But we have to answer a few fundamental questions. Okay, whether this AI is built for everyone. Okay, so let's see what I mean by this. Okay, before that, let's see what the definition of machine learning is. Machine learning is a field of study that gives computer the ability to learn without being explicitly programmed. Okay, it's learned from data without being explicitly programmed. Okay, so this is a quote by Arthur Samuel in 1959 itself. Okay, so what it's trying to say is the AI is completely learning from the data it is. Okay, but does this mean that the AI is not biased, or is it a global solution? So we have many questions like that. We will be answering each of them in our session. Okay, what is responsible AI and why is important? Okay, so this is a fundamental question we are trying to answer in today's session. So responsible AI starts with 4 things primarily. One is fairness, privacy, interpretability, and security. We will be discussing about fairness and privacy in detail in today's session. Okay, we'll be covering these 2 topics, and interpretability and security we can take it. It's a talk for another session. Okay, so what is fairness? So I'll just give a very outline overview over here, and we'll dive deep into it in each of the subsections. So fairness is building something that is equal to everyone. It should not be discriminative or biased towards someone. Okay, it should be equal for everyone, that is every human being. Okay, second comes privacy. So you know the various problems that we have with privacy issues, the Cambridge Analytica issue, which was related to Facebook, and many other privacy related problems that we have. Okay, so it's important that we handle this thing, privacy in AI. It's a very important thing that has to be addressed. Next is interpretability. Sometimes AI is considered to be a black box, but AI is making very critical decisions in our day-to-day life. Okay, which are even which has the potential to even affect our life. Okay, so it's important that we understand what makes the AI make the specific decision. Okay, so interpretability and understanding of the AI is very important, and we are trying to improving in this stage. Like neural networks are very more hard to understand than traditional machine learning algorithms, but that is algorithm that actually produce a lot of value. So it's important that we understand those things. Interpretability is very important, especially in business scenarios. Okay, in business scenarios, you might be able to predict something, but it's important that you are able to understand why this particular outcome is coming. Suppose you want to predict what is the sales. Okay, so it'd be nice if you can find the reasons for the increase of sale. So in those scenarios also interpretability is very used. And finally comes security. Building a solution which is secure is very important. It should not be vulnerable to attacks, because as you know, it's not just to AI solutions. Any solution, security is very important. Okay, so this is the overview that I wanted to give. Let's dive deep into the session. Okay, let's get started. So what is fairness? So fairness is creating a solution that is equal to everyone. It should not be discriminative or biased. Okay, that's the outline. So humans are not very good in designing solutions that are equal for everyone's need. Okay, we as humans have bias, and indirectly we induce bias in the products that we build. Okay, and the thing is, as you know, machine learning models learn from data. If the data is biased, indirectly the bias is induced into the model also. So that makes the model biased towards the end goal. So there are many problems in this, and there's no clear solution for this. We have to iterate it and try to find some solution. So bias can be added in many places, human bias. It can be during the data collection period, or even in the training period, or we can even involve bias in the evaluation metric. Okay, so we'll look into each of them and how to eradicate the bias in the model. So it's not possible to completely eradicate it, but we'll try to minimize it as much as possible. Okay, that's our goal. So you might have come across many news like the AI is not able to work very good for the black people, and also it has gender bias and nationality, racism bias. Those things are there. Okay, we know how much of impact that it can have as humans. So if it's not being given importance in the AI that we build, we can result in even more worse scenario in the future. So it's very important that we give a lot of consideration and priority to this system of building unbiased models. Okay. So almost every company from Google to Amazon, everyone has this problem or has faced these problems in the past at some point of time, and they are trying to overcome it. Okay. So AI should be it should be able to serve equally for different age, gender, race, and nationality, and even other different segregations. It should be able to provide equal solution to everyone. Okay. So I'll just show you a quick example. So most of you have should have played with this quick draw thing. So what it does is, if you're drawing something, it would be ask you to draw something. You will be starting to draw it. If it's matches with the thing, it says that you are drawn correctly. I'll just show it in real time. So it's just a small demo. It wouldn't take much of a time. So what it actually does is, it helps you to, it asks you to draw something and see whether it's the actual thing. So I'm not that good in drawing. Okay, it's able to find it. Okay, we'll just stop with this example. So what it does is, sorry. So it asks you to draw something, and based on your what you draw, it's able to predict. So this is the solution that we have in hand. What actually happens is, they are asking to draw a shoe. As the more and more people interact with it, it's the model is seeing more and more these kind of shoe, the one in the top, and very less in the type of the one in the bottom. So what happens is, as the model trains over data for a long period of time, after a particular point, it will not be able to detect these kind of shoes. Okay. So what it indirectly happens is, it creates a gender bias. Where, after a particular point of time, if someone new playing the game draws this kind of shoe, it will not be able to predict it as shoe itself. So this is a very this is a simple example to show how we can induce bias in a ML model. Okay. So there are many. It's very important that we solve this thing, because the last example was a simple one, but we may face the same problem in many important scenarios also. So there are many fairness indicators that are available in TensorFlow ecosystem, and also many other ecosystems, and TensorBoard also. I've tried to show these various fairness indicators in the end. So there are many tools to actually compare different models and visualize various metrics. Like accuracy is not the only metric. You have various metrics to evaluate how well your model is performing. We'll try to look into those things also. Okay. Okay, fine. So we know that bias. Okay. So let's see what are the methods we can avoid bias in our model. Okay. So there are two methods. One is database methods and one are model-based method. In database methods, we try to collect more of the data in which a particular kind of samples are missing. In this scenario, we try to collect more shoes of the female gender. Okay. But it's not a scenario where all the time you can collect more data. Okay. Or you can generate synthetic data, or you can reweight the data. So what you can do is, you can put more weight to the classes which are less in number. Okay. Those are these are related to database methods. In model-based method, what we do is, we create adversarial training examples and demographic agnostic recommendation. So these things are new methods that are evolved to solve this problem. In our session, we try to explain more on constraint-based optimization. Okay. So, normally machine learning models and deep learning models learn by optimizing a particular loss function. Okay. So it might be a normal accuracy. So what we do is, we try to train the model to reduce that particular loss. That's how we optimize our function. Okay. So TensorFlow has a thing called TensorFlow Constraint Optimization. It is open source and it is available both in TensorFlow 1.4 above, 1.14 and above, and 2 also. What it tries to do is, it sets not only trains for the entire goal, you can set a specific constraint, and it's trained in a way that it also reaches the constraint. It doesn't overflow the constraint. Okay, that is also considered. Okay, till now, if you don't understand anything, no issue. We'll just go with the flow. Please post your questions. We'll be answering it. Okay. So we are getting into the first tool that is used to make fairness. Okay. So what we are trying to do is, this is a normal unconstrained TensorFlow sequential model. So this is actually trained on a CelebA dataset. So what CelebA dataset is? It consists of 40 binary classes. So what 40 binary classes is? Like your age, whether you're smiling or not, whether you're wearing coolers. Okay, there will be 40 classes like this. So the only it is a binary class. Either it's a yes or it's a no. Okay, so those are the classes. So what we are trying to do is, this is a metric that shows the false positive rate. So I guess you would be knowing what false positive is. So false positive is saying something is true when it's actually not. Okay, a simple example is you have a disease. You don't. You might have a disease, or you might not have a disease. So you're not having a disease, but you're saying that you're having a disease. That's called as false positive. Okay. I hope you already know it, but so we are proceeding with it. Okay, fine. So we have overall population. This is the overall loss, the overall false positive rate, which is around 0.5. Okay, 0.05. So that's the percentage of the time we are getting false positive. But what we do is, it's for the entire population. So for subpopulation like young people and old people, we are classifying it. So not old, it's a binary class, so it's young or not young. So as you can see, for the young, the false positive rate is very low. Okay. For the not young people, the false positive rate is high. Even though the overall false positive rate is acceptable, the false positive rate of different categories of people are not in equilibrium. So it's like it's the model is working for overall it's fine. For a particular group of people, it's working very good. But for another group of people, it's not performing well. So we don't want a model that is doing like this. We want a model that is able to work well for many people. So almost everyone. Okay, that's our goal. So what we do is, so we have so basically we have two classes over here, young and not young. So what we do is, we create a subset, okay, of people that are young and non-young, and we post a constraint that it should be less than 0.05. Okay, so the false positive rate. So this is don't worry if you don't understand this coding. So it's I will link to the Colab notebooks that discusses about these things. Okay, so I just want you to make sure understand the constraint that I'm setting over here. The the TensorFlow constraint I'm setting over here is the false positive rate for each subset should be less than 0.05. Okay, so that's the constraint I'm setting. So when I'm optimizing the model, it would take in consideration this constraint that I'm keeping, and then it's a normal, like we said, the kind of optimizer and the learning rate. All these things are normal. Along with it, we also set the constraint. Okay, I hope it's clear. The constraint over here is we want all the categories that we are having to have a false positive rate less than 0.05. Okay. So after setting this constraint, this is unconstrained. This is the unconstrained one. Okay, fine. So this that was an unconstrained one. Now we are taking into a constrained one. So the constrained accuracy is, as you can see, the false positive rate for the not young people has reduced, and the false positive rate of the young people has increased. But the overall FPR, false positive rate, is kind of same. What we have done is we have given a trade-off of increasing the false positive rate of the young category and reducing the false positive rate in the not young category. That's what we are trying to do over here. Okay, by establishing this constraint. Okay, so till now we have seen about the things that are involved in fairness. Okay, I hope it's clear till right now. So if you have any doubts in fairness, please ask me right now. So we'll have a small discussion on it, and later we can continue with the other topic of privacy. Do you have any questions? Please, I have discussed about the fairness till now. Do you have any questions so that I can continue with the privacy right now? Do you have any questions? So now we are going to talk about privacy. Okay. So it's another important topic that has to be given to consideration. So first we saw about the bias we had in our traditional models and how we are trying to eradicate it. Okay. Now we are going to look into the privacy part and look how we can build privacy preserving AI. Okay. So why motivation of why we need privacy? Okay. So neural networks have some properties of memorizing things which unintendedly. So like let's say we are making a text-based model. So we train it on a huge corpus of data. Okay. So by unintentionally, it is kind of memorizing few details that are very private. Okay, like you have your bank account details. Okay, so like the training set had the line like Obama's bank details was 8058, something like that. So if a model might learn, if a completing sequence, like if I type Obama's bank details, it might predict it next. Okay, so it's important that it doesn't unveil these kind of data. So this only one kind of scenario. There can be many scenarios where your private information needs to be private. Okay, so let's see what are the various methods we can do privacy preserving AI. So there are two ways to go about it. Generally, one is differential privacy and federated learning. Okay, so both these things are in research kind of. So federated learning has been used in some products, and differential privacy is still in kind of research, and we have some tools to implement it, but it's still in the research place. So it's a good stream where you can explore more and learn. Okay, so we start with differential privacy. Differential privacy, it's a privacy preserving statistical analysis on large data. Okay, so our end goal is, without giving the information of an individual, we are trying to learn as a whole from the data set. Okay, so almost all statistical models try to learn the understanding of the population, not on a single person. Okay, so what differential privacy does is, it doesn't leak individual person information, but it tries to learn the insights as the whole from the database. Okay, from the data set. So what you can think about is, so how is my private leak? If I anonymize my data, so you have a particular data, okay, a set of values about anything. It can be your marks. Okay, it's to college DB. It has details of the students, except the anonymize this thing, their name and the roll number. Okay, so you can think just by looking at the marks, I cannot find who it is, so it's private. But the thing is, what I can do is, you might be private with this database, but there can be other databases outside that I can use and combine with them to get your private information. Like I might know your end of the day, I can know the final percentage of your mark. There might be another database where your final mark and your name might be there. So I can combine both of them and find your private information. I hope I'm making this point clear. So just anonymizing your data doesn't guarantee privacy of your privacy. Okay, it can be that you can get your private information. That is called as fundamental law of information recovery. So overly accurate estimate of too many aggregate statistics destroy privacy. What they are trying to say is, when you are able to get very accurate answers for many questions, by asking many questions, by querying many questions from the DB, I would be able to find private information, like who it is. Okay. So I hope this is clear, but I'll try to re-emphasize on this point once again. So we have a database, so we want to preserve our private information. So you might be thinking that anonymizing the name and the unique fields will help you to prevent it from leaking, but we can combine other databases or query it many times to get an accurate details about yourself. Okay, like I can first query who are the people who passed in this particular subject. I can combine it with some other complex query, and in the end of the day, I would be able to find the person, because I might be knowing some information about the person, and I can combine many queries like this and be able to extract the personal information of that particular person. Okay, I hope this is clear. Privacy, preserving the individual data, no matter what other data of the person is available outside. Okay, there might be many reasons available outside, but the way you collect data, it should be able to preserve the privacy of the person. Okay, I will just try to explain it in a very simple terms. Okay, so what I'm doing over here is, this is a picture of Mona Lisa. Okay, let's see each and every pixel as whether it's black or it's white. Okay, let's consider this. Okay, simple example. So concentrate on the blue box alone. So this is an example. So either it's a dot or it's a M. So white or black. Okay. So what I do is, I flip each and every pixel with a probability of 0.25. Okay, so this is the output of this. So each and every pixel are flipped. So if it's a dot, it changes to M. If it's M, it changes to a dot with a probability of 0.25. Okay, so this data was it is actually a dot. Okay, but since we are adding a probability noise, it actually becomes M over here. Similarly, many M's have becomes dot. Okay, so what we are doing is we are inducing noise into the data. So you might be questioning, why should I induce such a thing? Why am I making my data set noisy? We normally try to reduce the noise, right? So why am I trying to make it noisy? That might be the question that's arising. But this is the output after the noise has been added. Okay. So when you see at a larger scale, you are still able to find that this is the Mona Lisa picture. But the individual values are not released because we have induced noise in it. So even if this value is saying it as M, there is a possibility that it's not actually M. Okay. Hope you get it. So what we are doing is we collect the data, we add noise with each and every sample. Okay. And what we estimate is looking at a very large scale perspective. Okay. A large scale sample, the distribution remains same. Okay. No matter what the noise we add. Okay. But we are able to preserve the privacy as well as get the actual output that this is the Mona Lisa picture. So let's consider each and every pixel as a data point and the entire picture as the population or the training examples. Okay. So what we are doing is at each and every data point, we are adding a noise. So even if you're asking some questions like, let's say, I'm asking whether did you yawn during this session? So did you feel tired and did you yawn? So there is a possibility that if I'm asking this open question, many people would say no. Okay, because they don't want to give this kind of information. So what can I do is I can give him a thing that I can allow him to answer him correctly by adding a noise. So when I'm saying that when I'm adding a noise, he can give his original answer, and I will do add noise and flip it. So even when I see the final answer, if I say that this person actually says yes to that particular answer, its original answer might be yes or no. Okay, because it's we have a noise. But what we are trying to find by this is when we add noise to the entire population, the entire thing remains same. Okay, that's what we are trying to converge. So doing it for a very large database, the statistical significance remains. We are able to learn the data as well as preserve the privacy of the individual. Okay. I hope it's clear. So what we are doing is we are getting the raw data, we are adding the noise and securing the end out data set. It's a data which even if you look at the individual example, you will not be able to say whether it's a actual value or the one after which the noise is applied. Okay. So there are many concepts in this specificity, sensitivity of the data and how much noise you have to add to the data. And there are many things which depends upon the kind of data that you have and the person who collects this data. There are many things that are involved in how you do this. Okay. There are many courses, there are actually many complete lectures and courses on this. So I just wanted to give you an outline on what differential privacy is. So in simple words, differential privacy tries to add noise to existing data in order to make the individual person's data private without completely losing their insights from the data. Okay, we are trying to get the statistical significance while adding the noise. Okay, so OpenMind and this is another tool by Google. So these are tools that are available where you can actually perform these differential privacy. Okay, I'll try to show link. I will add the links to all of these in the end. Okay, so you can look at it later. Okay, fine. So I have one question. I'll just try to answer it. Okay, so I'll take the answer. So we are going the flow, we'll try to answer the Q&A in there. But I get the question. I'll answer in the end. Okay. Okay. So this right till now we have seen differential privacy. Okay. So in differential privacy, there are many things that has to be considered. as I said, what kind of noise, and it also depends on who we are trusting and giving the data. Okay, so it can be done in the internal level or even in the database side. So all these things, it depends upon the situation that you are deploying and the kind of data that you are using. Okay, so that was about differential privacy. So I hope first we saw about fairness, then we dived into privacy. In privacy, we first covered differential privacy to secure our data. Now we are going into federative learning. So differential privacy is not actually being applied to many real world applications. It's still in research and many tools are there. But federative learning is actually applied in many real world applications itself. And you have actually used federated learning before, for sure. Okay. So let's see first what federated learning is. So federated learning is a machine learning technique that trains algorithm across decentralized edge devices. Okay. Without centralizing all the data on a cloud server. So when you're thinking about a traditional machine learning pipeline, what you do is you collect the data. Okay. First you decide a problem statement, then you collect the data from various sources, put it in a server, do the data pre-processing, and do stuff like that, and feature engineering, and then you go to training the model, then evaluating and testing and deploying. This is the pipeline for traditional machine learning algorithms. Okay, that's fine. But what we are trying to do is, we are in federated learning, we are trying to train a machine learning model without actually getting the data to the centralized server. We are trying to do machine learning in a decentralized way. Sounds interesting, right? Let's see how it is being done, and what this is actually involves a lot of technological constraints and hardware related constraints also. Let's see how they are building towards it, and what are the tools and technologies that are involved in it. So you can say that I'm actually learning from everyone without learning from anyone. So what I'm trying to express over here is, I'm trying to learn from every individual. That's what all privacy we are trying to see. We are trying to learn from everyone, but we are not going into any individual person's detail. Okay, without learning from any specific person. So that's federated learning. So in the end, I will share you a resource where this is explained in a comical way by Google AI. It's quite nice, and you should give it a try. Okay. So let's get into it. So you know that we generate a lot of data. Okay. So example like our mobile phones and our PCs, a lot of data is generated from it. So traditionally what we do, we collect this data and send it to a centralized server. So sometimes these information might be sensitive information. And second is, we have latency. When you are running something in the cloud, the data has to be sent from your server, from your machine, local machine, to the server. It has to process over there, and it has to be sent back to your device. Okay. So there is a transfer of data, and there is definitely latency over there. And the network bandwidth also, there is also constraint of network, the place you are, many things are there. Okay. But our traditional algorithms are designed like that. So in what decentralized way that federated learning works is, so it actually sends the model to the device. Traditionally what we do, we send the data to the server. In this scenario, from the server, we send the model towards the individual devices. Okay. And each and every local model is trained in the device itself. Okay. So you're not sending the data to the server, you're training the model locally in your device itself. And after training on your private data, you are sending the model to the cloud. Okay. So your individual data is, so this is the small representation. So it is trained in your system and it's encrypted and sent to the cloud. Okay. It's not even the models, not the data is sent, the model is sent encrypted. Okay. So the model is sent encrypted to the cloud, and what the server does is, it combines hundreds of models that are there. Okay. And combine them and update its model, global model. So what we are doing is, we are actually using all the data that is there in millions of devices, using those compute to train the model, aggregating the models that is trained on individual devices, aggregating them, aggregating the encrypted model, and then updating the new model. Okay. Fine. So let's see. So there are many advantages in federated learning. I'll tell how each and every part of this works. Okay. So the point that you might be having is one question might be asked. So whether can I decrypt the personal information from the model that I get? So a model is trained in a particular mobile, let's say a mobile device, it's sent to the server. Okay. So whether I can get in sensitive data from the model. Okay. So what actually happens is the model is encrypted. Okay. And the encrypted model is not sent directly to server. It is actually combined. Hundreds of models or hundreds of thousands of models are combined, and the aggregate is only sent to the final server. Okay. So by aggregating, we prevent the leakage of sensitive data. Okay. So federative learning advantages are it results in smarter models. Okay. So the individual model that is trained in your device will be able to work better for you. That is one thing. There is lower latency. Okay. So since there is no communication required with the server, it runs in the on device. Low latency is required. Less power consumption. The sense we are there is power consumption required to send data. Okay, from the network bandwidth. Though that power consumption is reduced, and the amount of training that we have to do in the data center is also reduced, because data centers training actually has a significant rise in the global warming. Okay, so reducing that is also nice. And in the end, with all these advantages, it also ensures privacy. Okay, these are various advantages that we have using federated learning. But there might be many questions that you might be asking. Okay, so example of federated learning example is Gboard. So you might be using Google Gboard. Okay, the keyboard that you use, keyboard that you use. So what it does is it gets trained on the data that you use. Okay, so it works very well for you personally. That is smarter models. So what happens is as it gets trained better, it gives prediction and suggestion rapidly, lower latency, less power consumption due to the engagement, and it also ensures that what you're typing stays within your device and your sensitive information is not sent to the server. Okay, this is a real world example of the Google using federated learning. Okay, so there are few problems with federated learning, because so another immediate benefit is that you get personalized output. Okay, so that's a small representation of it. So you have mobile devices. So this is a model from an individual mobile. Similarly, we are getting models from millions of mobiles. Okay, so at least thousands of mobiles. What we do is we aggregate all of them, we encrypt it, we aggregate all of them, and then when we are sending it to the cloud. Okay, and this final model is again sent to the updated model sent to the devices. So in the entire process, the data is preserved within the mobile user itself. Okay, the model is encrypted. There is a concept called as homomorphic encryption. Without revealing the data, you can perform aggregation. Okay, you can search on it. It's called as homomorphic encryption. Okay, so that helps you to aggregate the model without actually need to do the actually see the model. Okay, and finally we update the model to every device. I hope this flow is clear. Okay, the thing I was talking, secure aggregation protocol. So what it does is the cryptographic thing. It doesn't send the model directly; it encrypts it, and only average of hundreds and thousands of models is actually sent to the final server. Okay, so let's see a small video of this. So this is the point where so we saw a point where it was each of the model was training in the local device itself, and finally all of them are sent to the aggregation. Okay, so it's trained in the individual devices. Okay. So in this particular slide, what we have seen is what I've explained so far. So it collects data from each device and trains, and those things are there. So another question that you might be having is how much of power of my phone is going to be used. Those kind of things can be asked. So it uses a TensorFlow lighter version for doing federated learning, okay, on your device. And there are few constraints that it has. Okay, few requirements to actually train your model locally. So it's sectoral constraint, and all of these things are mostly happening when you're not, the mobile is idle. Okay, generally when it's powered to the plug, and mostly in the night time. Okay, so you are not your performance when you are using for a critical task, it's not given up. Okay, the trade-off is not there over there. Okay, so this entire pipeline of federated learning. So we saw about fairness. Next, we came into privacy. We saw about differential privacy and federated learning. So differential privacy and federated learning are a huge topic by itself. Okay. So we have just seen it from a very high perspective, and I just gave you a vague intro on what are these things and how they are being applied in our life. Okay, in our products that we use in our life. So we are just there are many resources that you can learn more in detail. Okay, so there are many applications of federated learning. So there are few problems that can be addressed using federative learning, and few problems that cannot be. Okay, so that we have to see. It also depends upon your problem statement primarily. Okay, but it's a good way because you're also saving on your server training time. So your cost is reduced, the privacy is preserved, and the models there are many advantages of using it. Similarly, in differential privacy, we are indirectly what we are trying to do is we are adding noise. Okay, so the advantage that we have over there is we don't overfit the model. Generally, machine learning has a problem of overfitting the training data. Since we are actually adding the noise, there is a probability that we are not going to overfit also. Okay, so we are not still acquired a very good understanding of combining it, but it's still in active research. And with the latest problems that we are facing with respect to racism and privacy issues, and these concepts are very important to learn, and more people get into this research are very important. That's the reason for covering this topic in today's session. Like some people might be wanted to explore more on this. So a good place to start is secure and private AI. Okay, that's a wonderful free course in Udacity. I'll also share this link with Srija. She would make sure it reaches you. OpenMind.org is another wonderful website that does this, and also okay, it's a open source thing. Yeah, you can also give a visit to this website. Similarly, TensorFlow has its own. Okay, TensorFlow federated learning is another place where you can explore more. And finally, at Polydimensional, where I actually conduct machine learning courses, I have a separate section on responsible AI building. It also involves interpretability and many other tools. So the course is not yet released. It may take some time to actually release the course. So, but you can also register in that so that you will be notified when it's actually released. It's polydimensional.in. Okay, it's a community of developers basically. Fine. That's the thing that I wanted to share till now. So let's get into the Q&A so that there are a few questions that I'll try to answer them. And if you have any other questions, you can start posting it right now. Okay. Just a second. So I'll go with the first question. Okay, the question is, the first question is, does the noise affect the data? Okay. This is the question that's asking. So the thing is, so the noise we are adding is, we added a noise of 0.25, flipping it is common to everyone. Okay. So what actually generally is that when you add these kind of things to a very large data set, it kind of balances. That's how statistics works. Okay. That's the concept on which differential privacy is built. So when you see only this particular point, okay, this small blue region, you might see that there is a lot of noise, and you don't know whether we are actually seeing the same picture. But when you look at a very large scale, okay, what happens is the data is preserved statistically. So what we are trying to say is when we add these kind of noise to a large data, okay, the data, the statistical insights of the data is preserved. Okay, that's what that's the concept under which differential privacy works. Okay, I hope that question is answered. Just a second. Okay. Okay, another question is, say by same person, adding noise to a data might cause it to underfit. So it avoids overfitting. So the thing is, it's a trade-off. You have to correctly add the noise. So I'm not adding a 70% or 50% noise over here. So it depends upon the amount of sensitivity your data is. So if your data is very sensitive, you add quite a high, there is a value called as epsilon. That determines how much of noise you're going to add. Okay. So there are many things that if you go in detail, there are many techniques and strategies to add, how to add noise. Okay. So you'll be looking into it. Open Mind, this course is a wonderful place to start with. So if you are really interested on these topics, you should definitely consider doing Open Mind and the privacy preserving AI course. Okay. So that question is answered, I guess. So we had few people raise their hands, so we can answer them. Srija?
Yeah,
I can take the Q&A right now. There's a few people raise their hands.
Yeah, guys, like if you have any queries or questions, probably please use the Q&A in the below Zoom panel.
So use the Q&A or chat, anything is fine. I'm looking into both of them. So do you have any questions? Because we have covered a lot of topics. Okay. So I know it might be quite intriguing since we didn't cover most of the fundamentals. We just went into the advanced concepts. Okay. So, okay. There comes another question. Okay, is fairness is better to look to an F1 score? Okay. So so accuracy is a normal metric that we go. Okay. So this is a question by Vijay. So accuracy, if you have unbalanced data, let's say we are predicting a data set of people having cancer. Okay. So when you consider normal population, 99% of the people will not be having cancer. Okay. Only 1% of the people would be having cancer. So if my model says 100% of the people don't have cancer, my model is right 99% of the time. So accuracy is not a perfect metric when it comes to unbalanced data. So then we go into precision, recall, F1 score, AUC, ROC. There are many metrics. So F1 score is kind of a good metric to have. So similarly, there are many other metrics. So I said that bias can be involved even in the metric that we use. Okay, I mentioned about it. So F1 score is a wonderful combination of both precision and recall. You can also, if you are more concerned about one particular type of error, you can give precision more value, or recall, you can go with AOC. So, but generally F1 score is a good metric. You can go with it. Yeah, you are right, Vijay. So another question was, we humans are biased. How do you expect machines to be unbiased? Okay, yeah, we humans are biased, and what we try to do is we try to involve. So there are different methods, okay, and all of them are required to do it. So what we do is we can add many kind of people into the AI domain. So if only male people are involved in AI research, we by indirectly may induce bias into it. So involving many people, many kind of gender and race into the AI community is one thing that we can do. Okay. Another thing is we have to make sure that the data set is solving all the kinds of people. Okay, that is one thing. Like the face recognition systems had problems because it was not trained on black people a lot. Okay, so people try to oversample those data later, and we try to come up with some solution that is unbiased. So that's how there is no one golden bullet for solving bias. We have to do it step by step. But it's a very important problem that we have to consider and solve. Okay, any other questions? So we have another 8 minutes and more. So any questions in general? So it can be related to our session or any topic in general to machine learning or deep learning, anything is fine. You can ask me. So there are few people that ask me, raise the hands, you can talk now.
I believe like we
Okay,
have
okay.
a couple
Yeah,
of
we have question.
questions.
Yeah. So we are having, yeah. Is there an overlap of data with implicit noise? So, Bhaskar, can you make your question even more clear? Is there an overlap of data with the implication of noise in AI? So, overlap in the sense, I'm not, can you just elaborate on the question more so that I can give you a clear understanding on it? And one thing I want to give it clear. The Mona Lisa picture was just an analogy, okay? So, to make it clear, you don't train a machine learning model on image by swapping the individual pixel of the image, okay? I gave a clear analogy over there. Like, consider the Mona Lisa picture as the entire data set and the individual pixel as the each and every population. So you can consider this to a huge tabular data, okay? So each and every pixel is each and every data point, and we add noise to each and every data point, okay? So that's what we do. We don't do in normal computer vision. We don't add noise like that, okay? We do data augmentation. That's a different thing. Okay, how computer vision is related to AI? So computer vision is slightly bounded to AI. Okay, so there are a few computer vision tricks that doesn't involve AI. So you know about we have Laplacian we have many filters. Okay, edge filters and other kinds of filters. We can find particular pattern in the data. Okay, I have a complete video on computer vision. You can just search computer vision with TensorFlow in YouTube. You will be having it. Okay. So what I'll just give a small overview on it. So computer vision has evolved very good in the past decade, okay, especially due to convolutional neural networks. It's a special kind of neural network which works especially well with image data. So what it does is it sees spatial data and it's kind of, I'll just try to show you. Okay, it's out of the thing is, it is tightly coupled. All the recent state of the art algorithms in computer vision are related to AI and especially deep learning. Okay. So previously we used to have CAPTCHA to find whether you are a human or a robot. Right now we are using reCAPTCHA because the computer vision has got so better that it is able to find even that CAPTCHA. Okay, so reCAPTCHA uses many things like the way you change your cursor, the various other browsing session time, all these things are involved. Okay, that's one thing. Bhaskar, can you please elaborate on the question so that we can answer that, please? So adding noise is essential in differential privacy. Okay, that's one thing that I want to know. Tell. Okay, are there any security threats of using fairness in AI? Yeah, the security threat in the level, it comes in different ways. Okay, like attacking your, once your model is out there, some model can be, actually what can we do? We do is, we can do generate attacks, we can do attacks, okay. So a image can be actually modified in a way that a very small noise can be added to the image. And what it does is the entire prediction changes, okay. There are attacks like that. So that is one kind of hacking the neural networks. Okay, that's one thing. That one kind of security that we can have. There can be security vulnerability even in how the model is deployed. Okay, so there are many ways in which security vulnerability may occur. And that, as I said, it's a whole new topic for a different session. Interpretability in AI is very important. Security is also very important. I hope I will try to answer them in some other session and get into it. Okay. So any other questions? It's a couple of good questions that are coming. Happy to answer this. Any other questions? We have another couple of minutes.
I believe like we have a question from Sharmila. How is computer vision and AI related?
Yeah, I answered about it. I was explaining about it. So since computer vision is very much involved in AI, especially with deep learning and CNN, I spoke about it. So I'll try to give a link you with one of my videos in the chat, or I will share it as Srija so that she can pass it to you. So computer vision is kind of, it has evolved a lot in the recent decade, and it is kind of reached this peak. To be honest, it has outperformed human performance in the vision. So is there, wait, just a second. Is there any other questions? Like a security threat was answered. Computation in AI is answered. Regarding Bhaskar, I think its noise is added. I wanted more clarity on that question. The first question was answered. Human bias, how do we expect? So those questions were answered. Okay. So is there any new question?
Yeah, that is a new question. How to get started with AI?
Okay, I'll try to give. So the thing is, there are two approaches. One is bottom up, another one is top down. So what you do is you start with building applications, and then you understand the basic concepts. That's one way to go. And the other way to go is you do understand the basic concepts and then learn step by step. So AI is nothing. AI and the machine learning in general is nothing but it comes today, and end of the day, it comes to statistics, probability, calculus. Okay. So it's good that you understand these fundamentals. So to give you a perfect getting started tutorial. So get started with go to Andrew Ng's course called Machine Learning, which is a Stanford course. That's a good course to start with. I am creating a course in my website, Polydimensional. So it starts from the basic. That is one place you can go to start with. So it's always better to go with machine learning and then dive into deep learning. Okay. So one good resource is Coursera, Andrew Ng machine learning course. Okay. Then practice in Kaggle. So Kaggle has many Kaggle kernels to learn from. So that's one place you can. That's parallel you should learn. So if you want to cover the mathematics part, you can go with Khan Academy. Okay. So what I do is I'll just go to the question and I will type my GitHub repo where I ask people where I answer how to do it. Okay. It's bit.ly/ml_guide. So I sent you a link, so you can use this this repo. Suggest people for beginners to get started with ML and AI. Okay, and you can also reach out to me private. So I'll just a second. Sorry. So I'll just share my details so that if anyone wants to contact me, you can do so. So these are, you can contact me. So you can see the websites in my courses in my website. So that's one way you can learn. You can contact me directly. You can connect with me LinkedIn, Twitter, Medium, or you can mail me. Anything, everything is fine. Okay. So if you have any doubts that you want more clarification on, you can reach out to me. Other than that, just a second, I'll just answer the remaining questions.
Okay. So I believe there is a question.
Yeah. I'm just looking into it. Just a second. So how can AI use in the current pandemic? Okay. So there are broad ways in which AI is being used in current pandemic. So let's start with each one of them. So the thing is, first, in maintaining social distancing. Okay. So AI models can be object person detection model can see whether a person is kind of near or far away from each other. That's one thing. You can check whether the person is actually wearing mask. These are I start with simple examples and I go to complex ones. Okay. So maintaining social distancing and practicing things that you have to do in a pandemic can be monitored using AI. That is one. Second is people try to create the protein structure that would be able to vaccine that will be able to treat this coronavirus using AI. So there was a company folding at home. So the folding at home is many people gave that free compute power to actually train model. Okay, so they try to create structures like this. That is another way, creating protein structures using AI. That's two. Okay, and thousands of papers came related to solving this pandemic. Sorry, coronavirus. That is one thing. Okay. Okay, and what else that we can do is the way we are able to connect with people. Okay, so apart from where there is pandemic has two things. Okay, one is actually solving the pandemic, and another thing is how we spend our time in this pandemic. Okay, so there are it is also like looking at your symptoms. There are chatbots that say that the probability of you having corona or not. That is one thing that was tried out. looking at the X-rays and determining whether the person had the disease. That was one thing that AI was used, and there are many other use cases. Okay, like we had better visualizations on the data. We try to predict how much it's going to spread. That is one example. Better visualizations, and that's great example. So these are various examples of how AI was used in the pandemic, in the current scenario, and it has helped to a certain extent. Okay, so we have few other questions. Whether ML and AI is used in augmented reality and virtual reality? Definitely yes. Okay, especially in augmented reality. In virtual reality, you can you sometimes have the gear completely, so you can actually use the sensor data to actually do everything. Okay, in virtual reality. But in augmented reality, you're showing your camera. So let's say you are placing a particular object in a scenario. So what it actually first has to do is it has to understand the environment. Okay, not all your devices that support augmented reality has LiDAR or radar. What it actually has is it has some gyrometer. It has your camera vision. It has gyroscope and other accelerometer. So what it does is using all these information, it actually first what it tries to do is when you want to place a object, it has to create a plane. So first first what happens is plane direction happens. Okay, so there are I can with visualizations I can explain better, but just try to grasp it. Okay, so first when you go to augmented reality app, a small dots are shown where you can place the object. That is plane recognition. Okay, then you place the object. Okay, after that, even when you move to a different space, change your camera rotation. Again, when you come, the model is placed in the same position. It is anchored. Okay, that is using the accelerometer and gyroscope. Those things. Okay, augmented reality uses a lot of AI and ML, especially computer vision. Okay, like pattern matching. Those things are also like some of you might worked in Vuforia. In Vuforia, you can create a particular object and you can place an object over that. So the object matching is done using computer vision only, and sometimes deep learning. What is the most effective DL framework, TensorFlow or PyTorch? Which one is good to start? Okay, that's also a common question that we always get. So there are many frameworks. TensorFlow, PyTorch are few of them. There is also MXNet and Gluon. There are many others, but these are the two predominantly used. One is from Google and another one is from Facebook. So TensorFlow actually changed to TensorFlow 2.0. So I'm actually a co-organizer in TensorFlow user group Coimbatore. So if you're interested in TensorFlow and want to learn more about it, you can definitely join our TensorFlow user group community. Just a second. You can just search TFUG CBE. Sorry. TFUG CBE. So it's a community where you can learn about TensorFlow. That's one thing. And PyTorch is also equally good. So many researchers have started to use PyTorch since it's a kind of Pythonic and more interactive, easy. But there are when it comes to production, TensorFlow has very advantages. Okay, it can be deployed in many places. It has mobile support. I've showed you many tools and technologies that TensorFlow has this, like federated learning that can be used. Okay, so if you are going to and TensorFlow has a thing called Keras API. So when you're getting started, my suggestion is to get with TensorFlow and Keras. PyTorch, if you're going in a research perspective and want to try tweak on yourself, go with PyTorch. Okay, that's the thing. And there are also a few other objectives. So that's my suggestion. If you want to make a product and go into a production, like you want to deploy it in browser, mobile, and IoT device, and many more, TensorFlow is the way to go. And if you want to do research, PyTorch is the way to go. And the thing is, we have tools like ONNX that can convert models from TensorFlow to PyTorch and many other frameworks. So whatever framework you use, end of the day, most of the deployments are in C++. Okay, and tools like TensorRT and OpenWinnow, those are used for optimized running of models. Okay, inference. So anyway, you can convert it with both of them. So that's what I suggest. My suggestion is okay. So I hope that I answered that question. So I hope I have answered most of the questions. Is there anything that I have not yet answered? So fairness, I have answered. So okay, how AI and ML can be used effectively in web development application? and where are the plugins used. So TensorFlow.js is one example where you can easily integrate JS with browser and AI together. So there are many examples where you can run model on the browser. Okay, I'll just show you a small example. Actually, you can body page. So many TensorFlow.js, what it does is it helps you to run the model in the browser itself. Okay, so there are many inbuilt models by itself, so you can get started with it. That's my suggestion. Just a second. Yeah, I'll just show you a small example over here that actually runs in the browser. Okay, this is actually I hope you are able to see my screen. So this is done with TensorFlow.js. So the model is actually there. So what I'm trying to do over here is I'm trying to find the key points in my hand. This okay. Since I'm actually running using Zoom and actually using the front cam, I'm not able to run it. So I will share these link also, so you can see how it can be used. So TensorFlow.js and ML.js, there are ML5.js. There are a few libraries that helps in combining JS and TensorFlow together. So you can use those to actually build. So web application with AI is one wonderful combination. So you can definitely give it a try. So I'll just provide you with few links. Okay. So what I will try to do is I'll combine all these links and resources, and I'll try to share it with Srija, and Srija would be sharing it with you. Okay. And you can connect with me in LinkedIn and post your ask your queries. And the best thing is you can register for the polydimensional course, so that I'll be covering everything in detail over there. Okay. Fine. Any other questions?
Perfect. I believe we have answered enough questions.
Okay, fine.
And we are running out of time.
Yeah.
And thank you so much, Mathrayan, for the whole session and guiding us through how to start our AI journey and
thanks
with the numerous resources. As Mathrayan said, I'll get the resources from him and I'll get back to you with the recorded session, and also for the links what we have mentioned. And thank you so much, everyone, for attending the session. And thank you again, Mathrayan.
Thanks for inviting me. And thanks for the audience. Thanks for the wonderful questions. I had a wonderful time. And thanks for inviting me, DC Cap, and for you for inviting. Thank you.